too. And it doesn't get.
A wonderful talk about development of the modern critique about identity. Dr. Novis today is going to continue to give us the Orthodox understanding of identity. But let's begin with a prayer. So let's stand up and put our eyes here and sing O Heavenly King. Who wants to give us a kiss?
Yesterday I talked about all the random philosophy and theology that came out of the Catholic mind. And generally speaking, these abstract philosophical and theological doctrines are not natural. So in order to impose them on a people, they have to be externally imposed, generally through some kind of violent means, because they're not internally acceptable. And what you see in general, yesterday we talked only about gender, but this is the case in most Catholic and Protestant dogmas, that these theological and philosophical impositions are abstract enough to be violently imposed, and it creates something called cognitive dissonance. And have you ever heard that term before? What is cognitive dissonance?
Cognitive dissonance is a conflict in the mind between what is known and what is experienced, the two separate things that are known and that cannot be compatible. It's sort of a grinding of gears in the mind.
Yeah, it's a conflict between what you're thinking and what you're feeling. It's like trying to put a round peg in a square hole or something like that. So that was the issue with Catholicism in general, is that it created some kind of cognitive dissonance in the people that ultimately creates neuroses, right? And the West is marked by neuroses, generally speaking. So in order to impose this abstract dogma on people, right, they say it's externally imposed, right? It comes from outside. And the Catholic Church has to force their dogmatic repetition on people at really at excommunication point, inquisitorial points, right? It's what the Inquisition had to go through and enforce the repetition of their dogma. So that was yesterday, and you got a sense of that in the gender context. The modern and the postmodern context are attempts at rediscovering internal nature, right, as opposed to external repetition of random thoughts that make no sense. So the modern world, right, is marked by modern science, by attempting to discover truth not through dogma, not through theology, but by studying nature itself. Because they believe that by studying nature itself, you would find the internal truth of man, right, somewhere within. But the modern science reduced everything to dead matter and atoms, right, which was still created another sense of cognitive dissonance in the person, because there was an internal sense of life, of subjectivity. And so the postmodern reaction to the modern problems, right, is to find a way of reconciling cognitive dissonance through subjectivity, right, through feelings, through through what I feel to be true is true, right? In a sense, it's the most basic return to an internal understanding of self is the postmodern world. And the main words in postmodernity, right, this is the contemporary mindset, is authenticity, right? Everybody in today's world is looking for authenticity, right? What is authenticity? Yeah.
Something that's not fake, but something that's genuine, has roots in something that's existed before, or simply has a tradition from way back then.
Well, yes, actually, that's a very interesting thing, because some part of rediscovering authenticity is to look for the original, right? To go back to the original sense that was, and that's a part of the issue is that people in today's society, they realize intuitively that the history has created a sense of present that is artificial, that is somehow not authentic. And we've seen why, right? So the Catholic external imposition is not authentic, right? It just forces you to repeat dogma that has no authentic value. The modern world, even though it's attempting authenticity through modern science, through empirical science, is not giving the authenticity or the feelings that people desire, because it's reducing everything to atoms, right? Reducing everything to lifeless mechanisms and machines and things like that. So the postmodern rediscovery of the self, right, is for that sake, right? It's to deconstruct the history of the West in order to rediscover an authentic sense of self within, right, that I can actually own and say that's my own. But interestingly, how does the postmodern subject discover its authenticity? Where does it look for authenticity? Somebody else. Contemporary world, where do people look for the feeling, the internal feeling of authenticity?
Within themselves.
What?
Within.
But what do they find when they look within? Do they find God, or what do they find when they look within?
Their own ego.
What? Ego. Yeah, they find an ego. Right? Their desire is true, right? They want some internal reality that unlocks the secret of their being, right? They want an authentic self. But instead of finding a self, they find an ego. And how do they express themselves, what they find within themselves? How is it expressed? Like, what are ways of this ego, how does it manifest? Who else think of?
I guess the way we appear.
What?
Your appearance might be one.
Yeah, externally.
Yeah.
Right, so that's the paradox of the postmodern world. Right, they're looking internally for authenticity, but they only express their authenticity through external means. Right, so it's a contradiction within the heart of their desires. Right, so they desire an internal reality, but they can only express it through commodification. Right, what they buy. Right, so my authentic experience is having some Nike shoes, right, or coloring my hair red, and it's really, unfortunately, becomes very mediocre. And so the deepest form of internality that these people can find, generally speaking, is sexuality, right? That's the deepest sense of internal reality, because they don't go any deeper. And that's why sexuality becomes the only thing that people can talk about when they're talking about their unique sense of self. And even that becomes externally manifested, right, in things like gay pride parades, right? The way they're able to show their unique sexual individuality is by flaunting it, right? Like the rainbow, right? And sexual preferences, right? And creating these external, unique desires for, a certain thing, right? Not only the homosexual now, but because there's so many ways of manifesting sexual desire, right? You could say, hey, My way of demonstrating my unique internal reality is that I'm attracted to someone who's half man, half woman, right? And you depending, you say which half you want, right? And that becomes your unique expression of self, right? But still externally manifested. And therefore contradictory and ultimately unsatisfying. But the fact that postmodernity is pushing the sense of internal authenticity through sexual encounters, right, creates the problems that you're facing today, right, in high schools and colleges, because people in today's society truly believe that the only way to be an authentic human being is through sexuality. And they teach you to unfold your sexuality, to experiment, right, with various things, right? Oh, heterosexuality is too boring, right? If you just try, just experiment, you see that you like, right, whatever else, right? You'll like the homosexuality, and then you experiment with it, and you realize you were always already homosexual, right? That's what they want. You were never actually homosexual because they pushed you towards it. And that's the interesting thing. Yesterday, I mentioned a little bit about gay talks, right? And there's the question. Gay animals, right? They like to push gay animals. What do you think the percentage of gay mutations in the animal kingdom is? About what percent? Yeah.
1, maybe 2%.
No, that's.
A lot less.
It can get up to 10% actually, which is still very low, right? It's still 10%. And within even a Darwinian materialist world, right, a mutation is considered bad, and so nature should select against it, right, according to the materialist Darwinian mindset that everybody follows. What about they just did a study in 2017 of American high school kids, and they gave them a choice. They said, are you heterosexual or non-heterosexual, to make it as vague as possible, right, to make the numbers as inflated as possible. What percent of the American high school population identifies as non-heterosexual? Yeah.
50.
What? 50%. That's crazy, right? So completely off even the fallen natural context. And it shows that their agenda is working, right? It's an ideology. It's an ideology of authenticity that is successful in making people believe that that is the pathway of unlocking your true potential. Right? This is another term that you hear very much in the postmodern world. Everybody wants to unlock their potential, right? And be the best version of yourself that you can be. Because they realize that just following the Western, either Catholic or Protestant or modern mindsets, ultimately leads to a kind of neuroses and cognitive dissonance. So that sets up, yeah.
I've heard the term neurosis, for years and years, but what exactly is it and what does it mean? It seems vague.
Well, so it is. It's a general psychic disturbance, right? Where you don't integrate your subjective experience with the external environment, right? And that can manifest in different ways, right? It can manifest in psychoses or obsessive compulsive disorders, any kind of fantasy construction that takes you away from a world where you haven't been able to integrate because of some kind of trauma. And it manifests in many ways. Right? But the issue is that there's a cognitive dissonance that prevents the individual from integrating into the truth of the world. And the problem, though, right, is that the modern world, to integrate into the modern world, you have to do violence to your nature. So in order to normalize yourself into the modern world, you have to accept your cognitive dissonance. And those who don't get pushed into the psychology that attempts to, again, integrate them into a sick society.
He needs an eraser. He needs an eraser, Joe.
So the postmodern demand for authenticity, right, that's where we're going to transition into orthodoxy. Because we also believe in internal authenticity. We believe in actualizing potentials, right? This is an ancient philosophical concept, actualizing potentials. It comes from Aristotle, and it was used in by the church fathers, because that's what Christianity is supposed to do. It's supposed to allow you, it's supposed to give you the tools necessary to actualize the potentials that God put in our nature, right, within us. Right? It's supposed to lead to an internal unfolding of the natural truth within the human person. Right? That's what Christianity is supposed to do. And it's a whole system. And obviously it's geared towards our relationship with God, right, which is the ultimate flourishing of us, because we're able to transcend material existence and enter into infinite relationality. Right? So what more authentic experience could there be than entering into the infinite? Right? So that's what we're going to talk about now. Because the kingdom of God is within, right? So the whole idea, the internal man, St. Paul talks about the internal man, and not the external man. The internal man is what allows the external manifestations. And how do we do that? We do that through virtue, right? And this is an interesting concept. You hear about morality, and morality sounds stupid, right? When somebody tells you to be a good person, right, it sounds kind of watered down and kind of externally imposed, right? The idea of morality and the checklist of things to be a good little boy and girl, right? That sounds bad. Nobody wants to do that. But this idea of that externally imposed checklist of things that make you good boys and girls, right? This is kind of a Western construction of external manifestations that don't necessarily enter into the internal state of self, from which all these good activities that make the checklist arise. Right? What the West tends to do is regulate external behaviors without actually considering the heart through which those behaviors manifest. And that's why, going back to a Greek word for virtue and morality, it sounds much better than the connotations that morality has in the contemporary world. Morality, again, sounds terrible, I can't say it. But we believe in arete, right, which can be translated as morality or virtue, but it has a much more dynamic translation. Has anybody heard of the Greek term arete? Yeah.
And it's the name my parents chose to call our home school.
Oh yeah. Hey, so what does it mean?
Virtue and morality.
So, well, but again, because of these problems, I try to avoid the use of morality. Virtue also is problematic because it comes from Latin that implies manliness. Vir was man. And that actually it affects translations even within Orthodoxy. You sometimes hear about female saints with manly virtues. That's because they're translating arete into virtue, that then vir, right, has the implication of manliness.
That's false.
Because vir is man. What?
That's false.
It is false, right? And this is the whole point.
No,
is that
what
virtue-
you just said is false.
What is false?
Making a link between Latin roots and Orthodox hymnology. The root here is best understood as courage,
Where?
which is in Greek and in Slavonic, and which is a virtue especially associated with males, but which males and females both need to have. So I think you're overstating the case a little bit right now.
Well, so-
forgive me. I didn't mean to make a big,
No, that's okay.
but just keep
But
on going.
that's interesting because neither of those have the same link to manliness that it does in Latin vir.
Actually,
Right,
they
vir means
both.
No, arete does not. It doesn't. Arete is, well, it doesn't. What is the word for the word for man in Greek is aner, right? Aner. And anthropos, right, is man.
Which means human.
Like human, and Christ was anthropos, not anir, and arete, both arete
He was
and
both.
courage. Neither of those have connotations of manliness. It does, so I think it is through a Latin
No.
hermeneutic
Yeah.
that we get this idea that it is manly.
I'm sorry, I've introduced a distraction,
No,
forgive
it's
me,
true, but
but
it's
we're
true.
not going to come to an agreement
Right,
on this.
As a matter of fact, the word andria means courage as such, like courage in battle, and it's used in Greek liturgical texts in regards to both male and female saints. So andria, although it's obviously
That is man.
even logically related to a male person, it's the word that comes for that virtue.
Okay, so well, we do agree. It does make sense. But nevertheless, arete, which means virtue in general, but courage is only one of the virtues, right? So it might be more, it would be more a manly virtue, but all these virtues are unified in arete, which doesn't have the same kind of connotation of man, right? It simply means excellence, right? That's what it means in Greek, right? Excellence. And that's the idea, is that excellence is not reducible to one gender or another, and opens it up for excellence in both genders. And the problem, however, right, is that Latin, fine, I agree that courage is more of a manly virtue because men have to go to war. But that's one of the four virtues, all of which are available to both genders. That's the only point. But arete is more open. Virtue in Greek, in Latin, is more closed. And that it does, I think, it has created the problems that I'm attempting, that's the issue, right? Is why is there gender confusion, right? Why is there gender confusion in the West? Why hasn't there been gender confusion anywhere else, right? Why has all of a sudden, right, this issue of expressing myself according to my sexuality become the central focus and obsession in the Western world? And it seems as if a lot of this has to do with Catholic theology and the view and the reduction of women potential, right? And also male potential, but specifically female potential. And that, I think, it is a little bit of a jump, but not too much of a jump when you think of this word arete being excellence, in general excellence, and virtue being related to man. Right? Virtue as arete, right? Virtue and arete are synonymous. Courage is one of the four virtues. Right? Said this one might be masculine. But again, that decenters the focus on the masculine. And I think that's the most important thing, to decenter the focus on the masculine. Because men think that they're much better than women, I think, a lot of the times. Or more intelligent, or more courageous. Actually, women can take pain better than men. So I don't know, I don't know a little bit. But I agree with your point. I agree with your point that maybe, it is a little bit, the contours and the subtle contours of the discussion jumped over. But nevertheless, as a basic term, virtue is the basic term, arete. Here you have a masculine connotation, here you don't. In Greek, the masculine connotation is only in one of the four. That has to be true. So arete means excellence, and it's open to all people. And eudaimonia is the manifestation of that excellence. And what is eudaimonia? Eudaimonia means flourishing. It means good spirits. It means having good spirits, good daemons, actually, which we then became our demons. But eudaimonia is the consequence of arete. Excellence is manifested through flourishing. And again, flourishing implies this internal reality that manifests. It's not an external imposition, it's an internal flourishing. And you feel it, right? It's a feeling, it's an internal experience of excellence, of being excellent. And in the Greek context, in the warrior context, arete was the experience of aristeia, of being suffused by the light of the daemon, in which moment all activities were so perfectly precise that nobody could defeat you in battle. That's how excellent you were. And that feeling, that swelling up of spiritual energy that perfects the person in battle. That's where this comes from. And yep.
I think it's important, for the audience to know that the word daemon in ancient Greek just meant spirit. It was spiritual. It wasn't evil.
Yeah, it was all
It just meant any spirit. Meaning later on to mean specifically evil spirit. So eudaimonia means good spirit, and so it doesn't connotate evil. So that's, for those who don't know classical Greek, that's important to know.
But it's filled with the Spirit, right? Filled with the power of the Spirit, filled with the power of the good Spirit, from the inside out, right? Rather than from the outside in, right? That's the idea. And for both the classical Greeks as well as the Desert Fathers, this experience of eudaimonia, right, and the development of excellence, right, is through the four classical virtues, as well as in the Christian context, the three Christian virtues, faith, hope, and love, which are directionalities. But these four virtues within the classical context, right, are the basis are the basis for achieving excellence, and again, open to all people. Courage is most manifested on the battlefield. Women, the men, but also women can be courageous as well. Because this is the general human nature, right? The idea of the flourishing excellence of the human nature is that it's the basic internal reality that makes a human what he is, and her what she is. And both males and females have the human nature that can be unfolded into excellence. So these virtues are not just merely for men, they're also for women. And both genders can achieve this. And it starts with an understanding of the human person and the faculties of the soul. And the fathers talk about these four faculties of the soul being related to the physical makeup of the individual. And the lowest is this concupiscent part. And they say the concupiscent part is from the waist down, from the belt down. And this is the appetitive part of the human soul, the part that wants to consume materiality. And this consumption relates to gluttony, food, but also relates to sexuality. Lust is a kind of consuming desire. And so concupiscence, the virtue related to it is temperance. And that is controlling the appetitive desires, controlling both sexuality and food consumption and everything in between. And this is important because in our society, let alone these higher virtues, right, concupiscence is the dominant faculty that is aroused. And it's the lowest faculty. It's what we share with the lowest animals. And allowing it to run free, right, it leads to things like gluttony and lust. And ultimately, because it's the lowest, it prevents the movement up the ladder. It's concerned only with pleasure and follows attempts to achieve pleasure and retract from pain, right? The most basic animal instincts. But we see that if we allow the concupiscence to to run wild, then we end up running wild along with it. Right, so at one moment we want a hamburger, so we go follow the hamburger. At one moment we want, this or that, right? We want to look at the woman, we want to look at, we want a new car, all these things that we want to consume. We're completely splattered on our desires, right? Running here and there in order to consume this, and then that, and then this, and then that. And so our energies are spread out, right? We spend all our energies trying to satisfy all our individual desires. So what temperance does, right, is it limits our desires to what we basically need, right? The most basic, simple desires, where we don't need the new car, right? So we don't have to spend all our energy thinking about how we're going to buy the new car, how we're going to finance the new car. We don't need the hamburger, so we don't have to figure out how we're going to get the hamburger. Right, the simple desires. Temperance is making our desires as simple as possible to the basic needs. And what that does ultimately is it helps concentrate our energies. Right, so instead of allowing our energies to dissipate into the multiple desires, we simplify our energies. That also increases our energies and intensifies our energies. And this is the purpose of asceticism. That is to free ourselves from the desperation for all these external desires, concentrate our energies away from merely following our immediate pleasures, and having done this, we can move to the next stage, the next virtue, which is the irascible, which is the courage. Courage transcends the pleasure-pain dichotomy of the concupiscent part. The concupiscent is only following pleasure and moving away from pain. The irascible goes through pain to achieve higher pleasures. Right? This is also something we share with animals, higher level animals. But we have to first be able to control our desire for pleasures before we can move on to transcend pleasure through courage. Right? Courage here, this is the warrior virtue. But again, women can also do this because all it means is that we have controlled our pleasures through temperance, and we're able to transcend the immediate desire for pleasure, and ultimately also go through pain, right? Because we realize there's something higher than just the immediate pleasures. Yeah.
Now, the lowest you say is the appetitive faculty.
Right.
What do you call the next level?
So it's called the irascible, also called the spirited. But in this case, spirited is not like Holy Spirit. It's like a spirited horse. So we've consolidated our energies through temperance. Right? We've created a centralized intensity of energy rather than wasting it on all our random little desires. With that, we can direct the energy, right? The irascible, the spirited, like a spirited horse with all the power of the horse. And this is an important one because we have the term meekness that is very common in Christian language. And when you think of the term meekness, what do you think of? Yeah.
Submission to the will of God willingly.
Submission to the will. But does it have a good connotation?
Yes.
Well, for us, maybe, but in the world, no.
Greek friend insists that a better translation is unflappable.
Yes. Okay, so
So that if you deeply accept the will of God, then whatever happens during the day, you'll be unflappable.
well, so this acceptance of the will of God, it's all true. And this is all acceptance of the will of God, right? This is the way God created us. So by following the virtue of temperance, we're following the will of God. We're being meek, but we're not being meek in the kind of spineless jellyfish meekness that we think of meek. And the Greek word for meek actually comes from a horse on a bridle. Right, so that power of the horse is being directed with the bridle. So it's actually the opposite of the way we consider the term meek today, right, which is just jellyfish. Yeah.
I was going to say that the popular view of meek is milk toast, a wuss, someone who can walk all over.
But then, but the term meek, right, in its original Greek, actually has all the power of the horse directed properly. And temperance helps direct it, courage pushes it even further, pleasure-pain dichotomy, because you have the courage to go through the pain for something else. Right, so the irascible, the courageous, here can be used in multiple functions. Right, it can be used in a theological function. Right, the fathers say that the irascible, the courageous, is transcended through the warfare of virtue and vice. Right, to be able to fight the demons, to fight our vicious impulses, to move our horse out of the world. And it's important that these two, right, are still worldly virtues. Temperance and courage are related to the world. Temperance is the way we relate to pleasure. Courage is the way we relate to pain, right? And the way we're able to transcend both pleasure and pain.
Doesn't Plato describe the irascible and he uses the Greek word thumos?
It's thumos, it's thumos. And that's what's spirited. It's sometimes translated irascible, sometimes translated anger, which is kind of random. That's when the irascible goes wrong, it becomes angry, it becomes wrathful. Also, when the irascible goes wrong, the vice is despair as well, right? Because you don't have the energy. Right? So as the vicious manifestations of concupiscence are lust and gluttony, the vicious manifestations of the irascible are anger and despair. Right? Anger is too much, despair is too little. And both of these are still what we share with the animals. Animals have this. Lower animals have only the concupiscence, like amoebas. They go for what they want to eat and they go away from what hurts them. More complex animals have an irascible aspect, right? That they will fight other males to mate and things like that, right? That shows that they have the irascible, spirited aspect. But only humans have reason, right? That's the third. But reason can't be clarified until the material passions have been subdued and properly directed. The material passions, right, this irascible and concupiscent aspect, what they tend to do is cloud the mind, right? Instead of being able to see clearly into the world, right, we allow our passions to cloud our interpretation of that world. Right? The example that I like to give is a cow. Right? If you see a cow and your major passion is gluttony, how are you going to see the cow?
As beef.
Well, as meat. If your major passion is greed, how are you going to see the cow?
Money.
As money. But if you have tamed both your greed and your gluttony, then you can see the cow in its pure truth. Right? And that is what we can do with reason, but only after we've calmed the passions that cloud our vision. And again, here, asceticism, right, within our system, right, helps clear the vision and train the body. And it leads the way to philosophy, which helps train the mind to see clearly the things of the world. Not an end in itself. Ultimately, both the body and the mind are geared towards theology. But the reasonable faculty, as the third on this ladder, right? Once the desire for pleasure, once the desire for courage, right? This is the excitement of war, right? The thrill of war, right? That's the danger of staying there. Once those have been trained properly and directed accordingly, that clears the mind, right, and allows you to see the world transparently in its truth. And the major virtue there is wisdom. And there's a difference between trivia and wisdom. Our society today is full of trivia sophia, but no wisdom. What's the difference? Somebody else.
I feel like trivia is more like knowing things, and wisdom is more going out to apply it.
That's a good division. Yeah.
I'd say wisdom was a lot deeper. Trivia is the facts, and wisdom is the meaning behind them.
Yeah, is the essence behind it, right? It is to see beyond just merely words and to understand the true nature of things. Right? I can know all the little details like a scientist about a cow, but that doesn't mean I truly know the cow, right? And love the cow most importantly, and act according to my love of the cow and the truth of the cow. Yeah.
Well, reason, I guess, in the ancient Greek is logos, right? So that's the power to rationalize and create, right? So like the power that God gave humans to create things, like that's unique to humans and not to animals.
Well, I mean, the Greek word sophia, logos is reason, right? So this would be logos. And logos manifested in its perfection is sophia. Yeah. So, Greek words here. But that's good, yeah, it relates. And that's why, right, the philosophical impulse of man is the God-given image of God in man. Right, that's the fathers say, right, that the concupiscence and the irascible we share with the animals, but reason is the image of God in man. And finally, the last virtue is justice. Justice is, interestingly, the balancing of all the three virtues. Because some people might go to the extreme in temperance, right? The extreme in temperance leads to a desiccation of life, right? Drying out life and really sucking up all consumptive endeavors to a certain extent, right? You can go too much in temperance, you can be too temperate. And then what do you become? You can become a bitter man, right? That never enjoyed himself. And actually, interestingly, this is what you see with Protestants, right? Is that they have an enforced temperance, right, where they can't do anything, but they've never changed their heart. So by the time they hit middle age, right, they go through the midlife crisis because they realize they've never truly enjoyed themselves, and they've never had the heart where they actually desire true temperance.
Is that the Christmas Carol of Ebenezer Scrooge?
Well, yeah, Ebenezer Scrooge, right? He has never really enjoyed himself. He's only cared about these abstract calculations. And so you could say, actually, that's one of the things, right? Is temperance is demanded by capitalism, right? You can't consume anything. You just have to keep producing and making more wealth, but you can never use your wealth, right? You have $1 billion, but you've never taken your wife out to dinner or something like that, right? So yeah, and then what ends up happening, right? Because you have excess temperance, you become a bitter man that regrets, right, not having enjoyed himself, and then dies in this way, right? But the true heart of temperance, right, is a different thing. It's what I described, right? You can have too much courage, right? That's recklessness, right? People that just want to jump into battle without the proper understanding, right? Recklessness is excess. Courage. Wisdom, right? You can have, in a certain sense, an excess of rationality, right? That makes you disembodied from the rest of the world. You could say, nerds, right? Nerds are not integrated into the world. I'm a nerd, so I can say this. But justice is what balances all three, right? Justice puts each one in their proper place, manifests them in their proper context, in their proper time and place. Because that's the important aspect. And then when this happens, when all four virtues are manifested, right, the internal dynamic is flourishing, right? The internal reality, the essence, the image of God of man, right? What God has created us for, right? It is manifesting in its excellence, in its arete. And what happens in this case is that the human becomes the macrocosm of the microcosm, which is a very important concept. Microcosm. Has anybody heard this term before? Microcosm, macrocosm. Has anybody heard that term before? Well, yeah, go for it.
I've heard the term, but I'm not entirely sure what it means. So it doesn't. It almost kind of like a miniature parallel to something. Yeah, a miniature parallel of something that could be a future outcome.
The last part?
Could it almost be like a parallel to a future, possible future event?
Well, so no, it is parallel. Parallel is the key. So the human being is the microcosm of the macrocosm. Cosm is like cosmos, right? The world, the created universe. Yeah.
The concept of macrocosm and microcosm is kind of like a fractal, you know, like those are, where every small piece resembles the whole. So the human can be seen as the macrocosm, that if you understand the human, he has the same basic pattern as the rest of reality.
Of the whole of reality. And that's something that also the Church Fathers, especially St. Maximus the Confessor, emphasizes, is that within us, all aspects of the universe are recapitulated, is the term, recapitulated, are brought together. Right, so within us, we have the inorganic materials, right, the non-living materials. And some people, you know, the New Age people like to say that we're made of stardust. And what's really true about that is that we have every element in the universe within us, even uranium. Right? Every inorganic element is within us. So we have the inorganic aspects. We also have energies of the plant life. Right? We grow the way a plant grows without conscious activity. Right? We have unconscious growth, unconscious nutrition, unconscious digestion, all the unconscious aspects, some of which we share with plants, not heartbeats and things like that, but the most basic functions. We share this with plant life. And then we share the animal life, right? We have hearts, we reproduce, all these things. We share the animal life. We also have reason, which we share with the angels, right? 3 created creatures are in this intellectual world, right? Humans, angels, and demons. And we talked about that yesterday, that demons can pretend to be your thoughts, right? That's because we all share this rational potential. And only those 3, humans, angels, and demons, are in this rational world. And there are actually 2 worlds simultaneously in the created world. There's the invisible world and the visible world. The visible world is from organic to animal life. The invisible world is the world of reason. And this is actually kind of a parallel universe that angels live in. And we also have the ability to swim in this intellectual world. And that's why for the fathers, we can actually be higher than the angels, because we manifest both invisible and visible potentialities. The visible potentialities are trained according to asceticism. The invisible potentialities are trained with philosophy, both of which have to be guided according to theological principles, ultimately for the sake of God, right, and prayer and love, right? So one can have asceticism without theology and without philosophy. Then you get a system like Hinduism or Buddhism. Right? You can have a system of philosophy without asceticism. Many Greek philosophies did not include an asceticism and didn't have true theology. But in Orthodoxy, we have all 3. We have asceticism, true asceticism that trains the body, a true philosophy that trains the mind, and all of which are geared towards a true theology with a true God. And connecting all three, right, is the way of eliciting an internal authenticity that manifests all the potentials of the human nature. The postmodern subject, the only internal, authentic potential that they are manifesting tends to be concupiscent desires. Right? So they stay at the lowest level of human potential. And they call that, they say that's all they need. But there are at least 3 other levels, right, that need to be balanced along with. And this is the constitution, again, the most important thing, this is the constitution of the human person, both male and female. So for somebody like Thomas Aquinas, who denied females' rational potential, literally cut the head off the woman, right? Which is why it's important to emphasize that this is a system for all humans. And for St. Maximus the Confessor, when this ladder is walked, right? Individual genders, let me just finish that up. Individual genders are transcendent, right? That's why you could say manliness, but I think that's kind of a bad translation, just because it reduces it. But really, St. Maximus says, when one achieves arete, the genders are transcendent and the genders are unified, right? So both the man and the woman, both of which achieve human nature when they actualize their rational potential. Both men and women do this. And they transcend their particular manifestations as men and women. However, at that point, when the virtue is manifested in the world, the difference becomes a secondary mode of manifestation. So once you've achieved your rational nature, right, this is the main priority of both men and women should be to actualize their rational potential with this system. However, when they manifest in the world, right, they will manifest in different ways. But that's a secondary reality. A woman doesn't have to think about being a woman, she has to think about being an excellent human being. And then when she is an excellent human being, she will manifest it in a mode that is appropriate to a woman. Secondarily, she doesn't have to think about it. Right? It will just happen, because that's part of the nature that's attached to again, as I said yesterday, attached more to the end aspect. Same thing with men. If the man's focus is to be a rational man, he will be a rational person who happens to manifest his rationality in a male mode of being, but again, secondarily to the rational activity.
So I have 2 questions. First, I'd like to thank you for giving us this picture of a human person. And I think I'm wondering if you can try to bring that down to earth for us and help us see how we can use this understanding when faced with modern nonsense, right? To face that in our lives, and how do we use that to inform how we relate to the world now? And second, and related, how does Christ fit into all of this?
Well, God gave us this nature, right? So this is what He wants us to do. He wants us to manifest our nature, right? He created us. This is the way He created us. And theology is the relationship with Him, right? He's the Logos. The Logos is the reason. The reason is what's in our nature. And our nature is to manifest this system in order to have a pure relationship, right, with both neighbor and God, which one cannot do if they're bound by the passions, right? The passions create a self-interest, right? Especially if you're bound by concupiscence, you're interested in only satisfying your passions. And it creates a cloudy vision of the world, right? The idea of the cow, right? God created the cow. But I don't see the cow that God created because my vision is clouded by either greed or gluttony or things like that, right? So I can't even see God's creation because my vision is clouded by my passions. So this system is here to bring out the truth of the world in order to naturally elicit the love of neighbor and God. right? Which can't happen if I'm just considering how I'm going to satisfy my appetitive desires. And how in relation to the world, and then I'll get to it. And so in relation to how we deal with the world, well, the world is stuck on this lowest level of just following external desires, right? Of being plastered from one place to another, going from one sexual partner to another, from one meal to another, from one hairstyle to another, right? And I think the most important aspect of that is that it wastes your energy, right? God gave us only so much energy. And if our energy is divided according to a million different desires, then each desire is only going to get a fraction of our energy. Temperance helps concentrate that energy. Right? So in dialogue with people, right, why is the world so tired? Everybody's tired, right? Everybody just wants to die. They're exhausted. You know, it's too much. They want too many things. Right? They want too many things. They're never satisfied. Right? That's the basic reality of the world, is that we're always chasing our desires. We're always busy chasing our desires, and we're never satisfied. We never just simply stay in one place, being satisfied with simple existence. Right? So this basic level of temperance, right, I think is where the dialogue has to begin. Because once you realize how little you really need, using ascetical training, right, not only does it cleanse the vision in order to see the world as it truly is, and the world that it truly is a beautiful world that God created, and naturally, through the beauty of the world, and to see the Creator who created it, who is equally as beautiful, or more so, more beautiful, and that again elicits a natural desire of love. And also, they say that when your vision is cleared, then you will see the world, in its beauty, but also be naturally repulsed to evil, because evil is against the world that God created. And an important thing here, right, is what is virtue and what is vice. Virtue is going with the nature that God gave us. Vice is going against the nature that God gave us. And ultimately, that's why it's a destruction.
I just want to let you know, we have about 5 to 10 minutes left, and I hope we can get some questions from
I'm
you.
done, I'm done, so yes.
So, Nicholas is very quick.
I just had to understand, and I had a somewhat confusion, because as I understood it at least, the rationality and the power to create can be twisted into, if the demons have it too, then why is, I don't believe it's the highest virtue then, because then the highest virtue, say, is the purpose of God and love and hope, and so I would like to at least believe, I would like to at least, I don't know. I would like a clarification on how, like, I think that logos isn't the highest order, that, like, love would be above logos as a purpose to putting that tool of creation into use.
Yeah, so that's good. So this system, right, is the training of the human person, right? This is how we train the human person. So you could say it's on this lower level, right? It's on this level of philosophy and mysticism. So in this state you have, right, temperance, courage, wisdom, and justice, right? So that would be lower. The theological virtues are faith, hope, and love. And you're right, that's the direction, right? So asceticism and philosophy are geared towards theology, and they're geared towards faith, hope, and love, right? So they are the highest virtues, and they're the way we use it. That's exactly right as well, right? So we can use our minds for good and bad. But again, if you're in wisdom, right, the demons don't have wisdom, right? They might have a mind, but they use it to pervert the world, right? Like a scientist has knows all the laws of the universe, but uses it to create an atomic bomb that destroys the universe, right? So, but is that true wisdom, right? That wouldn't be wisdom in that case. But yes, everything has to be, all this has to be suffused with love, right? If you're not doing ascetical trainings and developing temperance for the sake of loving God and your neighbor, right? For the sake of clearing your vision in order to see the world truly, then what are you doing it for? right? What's the whole point? And then you get maybe a Hindu, right? Hinduism would be asceticism without theology and philosophy. And what are they doing? They just end up on the top of a mountain alone, right? Contemplating the universal fire. So that's good. Good point.
So on the subject of, again, something down to earth and tangible for us, I'm trying to think, so the postmodern subject, when they're trying to express themselves authentically, untrained by everything that you're saying here, you get our modern culture, you get an attempt to express itself that comes out just at the basis level, and that's where all the confusion is right now that we're trying to make sense of. And so my question is then, what would it look like, what does a postmodern Christian look like who's trying to authentically express himself? And could that be, I mean, obviously we have culture behind this. Art must have been a big part of that, and a trained person can produce beautiful art, right? Is that an expression? Is that an authentic expression? Art in general? Or even married life or monastic life? Is that an expression? Is that an alternative to the base, the base form of expressions that are confusing us so much right now?
So this system works in any context, right? So you should be temperate, wise, courageous in both your married life or in a monastic life. And monasticism, right, is geared towards asceticism and prayer, right, generally, right? So that's why it's the focus training ground for this system. Right, and especially with the concupiscence, right? You're away from the world. You don't have the splattering of desires. You're able to concentrate your energies on one purpose, which is prayer.
But we're also trying to express ourselves. And expression, I think, is the big thing. I wonder if that's a big thing. It was a very big thing for me when I was this age here, to express myself, right? To express ourselves. How do we express, what does the expression of the Christian subject look like? And for me as a monastic, I'm expressing my love for God and my lifestyle, you know, and whether I show that to the world or I show that to God is one thing, but maybe the students here will be able to express that love for God, express themselves authentically as postmodern Christian subjects in their love for God and their love for the husband and their love for their wife and their love for their family and things like that. Anyway, this expression of oneself that you started on seems to be an important thing to connect to.
That's it, yeah, that's it. So this, I guess, they say that these systems are formed without content. Right, so this gives you a form that helps you express your content. Right, so once you've trained your desires, once you've trained your mind, right, to have a single-minded focus, then the expression comes naturally from it. Right, so if my mind is just filled with fornication and gluttony, then I'm going to express myself in terms of fornication and gluttony. But if I've trained myself in different ways, I'm going to express myself also in different ways. So that would be a secondary reality, actually, right, to this, to the training, is the expression. You express who you are. This trains you to be something. And art, right, is very similar. That's actually an interesting thing, right, because that goes into, you could say it's a kind of asceticism, right? It's a kind of vision of the human being. And for us, for the icon, it's an image of the ideal world, right? It gives us something that we can reach for, right? A window into heaven. So it's almost an abstraction. I talk about, actually, that's a whole different concept. But if you look at the extreme realism of Catholic art versus the extreme abstraction of postmodern art, icons seem like a balance between the extreme abstraction and the extreme realism. It's an abstracted realism that draws the mind beyond materiality into contemplation of higher realities, right? So pure abstraction, you could say, is a Gnostic disembodiment, right, that rejects the world, abstract expressions, etc. Realism, right, is too carnal and too worldly, but the icon is a world that's reaching towards the abstract, towards towards what is beyond itself. So it's a balance of abstraction and realism.
I'm sorry, I think we're gonna have to wrap it up, but I do wanna thank you very much for coming.